in here.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Fantasy Players Club. I'm your host, Levi the Heartbreak Kid Valentine at Levi_Valentine on Twitter. Joining me are my co-hosts, Brent Hut Hikes. Follow him at Brent Hikes, Heikes on Twitter. And Trevin the Baby Maker Cremosta, whose tweets are too hot for your eyes.
I thought we were going with Olympic champion.
I bet you got a really hot one coming out tonight because we have huge breaking news. The Las Vegas Raiders got the last piece they needed to put them over the top, win a Super Bowl. They're adding defensive tackle Gerald McCoy, 33 years old, signed for free agent. Let's get some instant reaction here. What do you think?
I think he's a solid piece to add. You can at least give him a try. He went to the Cowboys last year, I believe they signed him, and he didn't make it through training camp because he tore, his pecs or something, if I remember right. So they didn't deal with the medical and got a cut. It's a low cost, something where they might be able to add some depth for D-line. So I see a Super Bowl coming.
Yeah, he had a ruptured right quadriceps tendon last year. So
I say it solidifies them getting third place in the AFC West. So, congrats.
He's a confetti guy. I can close my eyes and see him holding a Lombardi and with confetti coming down around him. So, it looks good.
Brent, who's finishing fourth in that division?
Broncos.
Raiders are second. Come on.
I think the Chargers have that.
No, you're out of your mind.
They might be close. But
I mean, none of those other three teams are really close to the Chiefs, so does it really matter?
The Raiders can beat the Chiefs. We've seen it time and time again. So
true.
Yeah. Speaking of injuries, Brent, you're playing through pain tonight. You got a back injury.
Yeah, I went golfing this past weekend, and my back was a little sore and decided to stretch it out earlier this week, and might have went too far, and I cannot sit down. So here I am. I'm potting through the injury, I guess.
Yeah, Brent's thinking on his feet tonight, everybody.
Good one.
Trevin, just a few more months, you'll be able to make jokes like that.
So you actually heard it by stretching, Brett. That might be a lesson for everybody out there.
I probably didn't stretch the proper way. Twisting your back a little too far is probably not the best thing to do.
Yeah, probably not. You need to come up with a better story, that's for sure.
I know.
In other injury news, we had two pretty big injuries for the Colts this week, guys, and pretty crazy story here. So Indianapolis Colts All-Pro guard Quentin Nelson will be out 5 to 12 weeks with the exact same foot injury that quarterback Carson Wentz also suffered this week, according to Coach Frank Reich. Dr. David Porter performed the surgery on Wentz on his left foot on Monday, and he performed surgery on Nelson on Tuesday. So busy week for Dr. Porter. They had a quote in here from Reich who said, "Where Carson's injury was an old high school football injury that cropped up, Hughes was not an old injury, but was a developmental anomaly, something he was kind of born with, something always there, you never know, and all of a sudden there it is." They got their different ways, but essentially the same thing. Can't make that up, right? Right, Frank, right. So the actual injury, they said, was a broken bone came loose in Wentz's foot, and they all agreed that surgery was the way to go to remove the bone out of the fifth metatarsal. That's your toe, Brent, and ensure the injury didn't return. So, like I said, Wentz had surgery on Monday, Nelson on Tuesday. 5 to 12 weeks is a big range. So 5 weeks would be September 6th and 7th for those two, or a few days before the first game of the season on that Sunday for the Colts. 12 weeks would mean they'd miss the first 7 games. So, fellas, what do you think this means for the Colts, for Jonathan Taylor, and for the rest of the offensive weapons on that team?
First, for Wentz, I think you have to kind of think he's just not going to play at all. If you're an owner, owner of Wentz, I would be going into this season thinking he's just not going to play. So make your plans around that, because it just sounds like he's had his injuries in the past anyway, and this foot injury sounds pretty bad. So make your plans around if he does play, you got some gravy, because it's scary to me.
Yeah, I'm with you. I guess I don't know if we'll for sure miss the season. I guess it depends on how they're doing and who they get to replace him. Like if
sure,
it is...
and I'm not making a prediction he won't. I'm just saying that's how I would be planning my team around him not playing at all if I'm looking at my season.
And for the other players, with them missing Carson Wentz, I don't know. It might hurt their receivers a little bit. I wasn't worried when I heard. I wasn't worried for Jonathan Taylor when I heard about Wentz, but obviously I was worried quite a bit for Jonathan Taylor when I heard about Nelson. Nelson's probably the best player on their team, most important player, and if he misses any games, that's not going to be good for the Colts. Not going to be good for the whole team. So that's huge if he's out any games.
Yeah, Matthew Berry on his show Fantasy Focus today, they had an interesting graphic. I don't know if you guys saw this, but they had stats for Jonathan Taylor last season running left, and Quentin Nelson is obviously the left guard, and versus running right. And Taylor averaged over 4 yards per contact per carry before when running left versus only 2 running to the right. So Quentin Nelson makes a huge difference, or at least he did last year, and Taylor's going to have, I think, a harder time this season. Not that he won't still be a really good fantasy asset and have a lot of potential to be someone you can rely on this year, but maybe temper expectations a little based on that number. That's just crazy. Twice as many yards per carry before contact running
crazy.
behind Nelson.
And they also lost that Costanzo to retirement this past year, too. He was another good lineman that they're missing out on that they had last year. So it'll be different, at least for the first couple games if Nelson misses. So
Go ahead, Levi.
It'll be really interesting to see how each of them goes through the recovery, and if, hopefully, if I had to pick one, I'd hope that Nelson is the one who returns after 5 weeks, and if one of them has to take longer, that it's Wentz. But either way, hopefully they're both on the shorter end.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. If I had any Colts receivers, I think I'd rather Wentz come back first or come back before him, because I'm not a Wentz fan. I don't think he's very good, but Colts are in a tough spot where the only backup they have is Eason, who by all accounts doesn't sound like he's very good. But they also don't know how much they want to trade for somebody else, given Wentz is pretty open-ended on this injury. You bring in Garoppolo and have to pay him big bucks, and Wentz is available to come back after week 4.
You know who is available? Phillip Rivers.
Phillip Rivers.
In shape. One offseason with his 10 kids was enough. He's ready to come back.
There's no way he comes back without Nelson there, though, now, right? I could see him getting paid for another year if Nelson's still there and protecting him, but just to go out and get the shit kicked out of him doesn't sound like the best idea.
Yeah. If I was Jim Irsay, I'd be driving to Andrew Luck's house.
Yeah.
Trying to talk him into coming back. But like you mentioned, with Nelson out, that probably becomes a lot less appealing.
Yeah.
At least with the Colts receivers. At least with the Colts receivers, to your point, Trevin, I don't know how much you were really counting on them for fantasy production this year. Pittman, T.Y. Hilton, and Paris Campbell, they were all would have been pleasant, I think, surprises if they turned out to be somebody you could start on a week-to-week basis, unless you're in a really deep league. But for Jonathan Taylor, that's what I was thinking when I was saying, hopefully, if you had to pick one, I'd hope that Nelson comes back. But obviously, having the quarterback out doesn't help him any either. So
I saw some Raiders reporters saying that Mariota's been a name floated out there that the Colts could try to trade for, and Raiders reporters are like, I don't know if the Raiders should do this and give a wild card competitor their backup quarterback and help their chances. I'm like, just trade his ass. What are you talking about? You can't worry about taking a wild card spot. If that's all you're shooting for, then just shut the season down now.
Well, they know they're not winning the division, to my point from just a minute ago. Nick Foles also apparently playing the best football of his life.
How funny would that be if Nick Foles replaces Wentz again?
He's lobbying for it as the third string quarterback on the Bears, apparently. He's ready to get out of town.
That would be amazing. And it's the exact same scenario again. Colts going to win the Super Bowl.
And those coaches are familiar with him too, so you never know. I wouldn't be surprised if it is Foles.
Boy, I will make a guarantee right now. The Colts will not win the Super Bowl if Nick Foles is their quarterback this year.
We've seen it before, Levi.
We have. All right. Trevin, you have an announcement you want to make this week before we hop into the main event?
Yeah, I don't mean to make this about my fantasy teams. I'm just really stoked that got Darnold off my team. I offloaded him, and I'm super excited about it because that guy sucks. And I don't have to deal with him anymore. That's all I had to say about it.
What was the trade?
It ended up being Russell Gage and Sam Darnold for a 2022 first. At the end of the day, took a couple trades to get there, but that's what it ended up being.
Not bad.
What do you think, Brent?
It's a super flex. Yeah, I'd probably do it too, especially if you're sitting good at quarterback.
It was to the guy that lost Wentz. It was after the Wentz news, so it kind of had him bent over a barrel. But yep, I'm glad I don't have to pay attention to his ass anymore because he sucks.
But he is with Joe Brady now, and you never know.
Oh, I know.
Career year coming for Sam Darnold now. Fade Trevin.
Maybe. I was looking for reasons not to do it, and man, he sucks. He just has like his very best games of his 3 seasons are just 300 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he did it like 3 times. It's just there's no upside. He's awful. I was looking at all the comparisons though between like it's like it's kind of a Tannehill situation, but Tannehill was at least efficient. He wasn't a great fantasy guy, but Darnold is just terrible. So I know I shouldn't be spiking the football now. Darnold's going to end up having a great career, but I'm excited I don't have to care about him anymore.
Isn't his best finish like quarterback 28 or something?
Yeah, his 3 years are like 28, 27, and 30 or something like that. Wow. It's just been terrible.
Crazy.
So I thought this was my one chance to get him off my team.
We do have a viewer question. Kelly Bassnett wants to know, do you think the Colts will be less likely to rush Wentz back with potentially having to give Eagles a first-round pick, which, to his
it's
point...
75% of the snaps, I think.
Yep, if Wentz plays at least 75%, then the pick becomes a first round.
Ooh, I like that. That's a good point. He has to play more than 75% of the whole season?
Yep. Of the snaps.
Of the snaps. So
otherwise, it's a second-round pick.
Huh. So if he misses 5 games, that'll be it, right?
Boy, it's a good thing they put that in the trade clause.
Yeah, the other potential one I'm looking at now is if he plays 70% of the snaps and the Colts make the playoffs, it also becomes a first-rounder.
Okay.
So if he misses... He'd have to miss probably 4 weeks, 5 weeks to get that 25 to 30%.
Mm-hmm.
I doubt they're doing it on purpose. I think they'd rather make the playoffs, but it's definitely a good thing to put it in the trade, given his injury history.
Yeah.
Certainly no incentive to rush him back.
Yeah.
I mean, other than potentially
winning some games.
Yeah. That'll be interesting to see how they handle that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys think about putting trade clauses like that into fantasy trades?
That would be smart, but way too complicated.
It'd be tough to keep track of, Mr. Commissioner.
As long as I'm not the commissioner.
Yeah. I like it, though.
Percent of snaps. Yeah. I don't know. That'd be a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting question, though. Might be a discussion for another time. Let's hop into the main event. And for tonight's main event, we have the AFC North Preview. So we've got the Bengals, the Browns, the Ravens, and the Steelers, and we're doing our usual Dynasty Buy, Dynasty Sell, Dynasty Stash, and then Redraft Sleeper and Redraft Fade. Fellas, last year we did this preview. It was just me and Brent. No guest for this one. My Dynasty Buy was Jarvis Landry, and Brent's was Joe Burrow. So mine was not a great call. Brent, yours, I don't know. How you feeling about Joe Burrow based on the news that came out today?
Yeah, how do we not talk about that?
Yeah, maybe we will talk about it a little bit later.
All right.
But I don't know. It's obviously not good. But I mean, we've seen him play last year. Maybe he's just trying to get used to his knee. So I don't know.
Yeah. Dynasty Sell, I had Mark Ingram, so that one looks pretty good in hindsight. Brent, you had Baker Mayfield, which looked good for part of the season before he finally got going.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I still don't hate what I said last year. It's. I mean, he did play better down the stretch, but I still think the Browns are a quarterback away from being Super Bowl contenders.
Big year for Baker coming up, one way or the other. Dynasty stash, we both had Anthony McFarland, so I think we had the right thought process there. But with them going out and getting Najee Harris instead of letting Anthony McFarland take over, that probably dashes the hopes of anybody who took our advice and stashed McFarland. Redraft sleeper, I had Austin Hooper, which was not a great call. Brent, you had Deontay Johnson, so you got to feel really good about that one.
Yeah, I liked it. I like him again for this year.
And then for redraft fade, we both had Marquise Brown, so that one turned out pretty well also. All right, let's hop into this year, fellas. Brent, who is your dynasty buy?
My dynasty buy is Donovan Peoples-Jones, Cleveland Browns wide receiver. He's a former five-star wide receiver from Michigan. Had some awful quarterback play back when he played at Michigan. The quarterbacks and the offenses that he played with were just not good and kind of held him back a little bit. He only played in 7 games last year as a rookie, but he did make some big plays. He only had 14 catches, but he did have 304 yards out of those 14 catches, and he got 2 touchdowns. I do think eventually, maybe even this year, he could be a decent number 2 option for the Browns. And I mean, from reports at a training camp, he's looking really good again. So if Odell goes down again, or if Jarvis Landry doesn't have a very good year, I think Donovan Peoples-Jones could be one of their top receivers. So I'm buying him. You can get him pretty cheap too.
Yeah, I agree with you. And with Beckham, he still has 3 years left on his contract, but I think it's actually non-guaranteed after this year. And then Landry's got his contract goes through next year, through 2022, but I think his has a very small cap hit after this next year. So they might both be gone pretty realistically next year, and Peoples-Jones could be looking at starting wide receiver next year. Like you said, I like his measurables. I like his pedigree, so I'm with you. I've actually got him in a different category.
Cool.
Yeah, I don't hate it, Brent, other than it's a pretty cheap dynasty buy. I mean, you're not exactly swinging for the fences here. Might be more of a stash for me, but I don't hate it. They did take Anthony Schwartz in the 3rd round this year, so look for him to kind of compete for that number 3 role with Rashard Higgins and Donovan Peoples-Jones as well. But certainly, I think there's an opportunity there, especially after this year, like you mentioned, Trevin, with those 2 potentially either being completely gone or phased out as they kind of continue the downhill slide at the back end of their career.
Levi, did he break out in college? Donovan Peoples-Jones?
Yeah, 19.5, 75th percentile.
All right.
Yep. So, I don't know. Michigan receivers, Jim Harbaugh's not doing them any favors. Let's say that much.
I can't believe they keep getting the recruits there, the big 5-star receiver recruits, because, he doesn't help them any.
Absolutely not. Trevin, who's your dynasty buy?
My dynasty buy is Lamar Jackson. I think he had a down year last year. I think this is going to be the cheapest you can get him for the very next couple years. If you want him, now's the time. His ADP for dynasty drafts looks like he's 5th or 6th, and I think he should be up there at probably 2 or 3. So I really like him. I think last year was a down year, and he gets you such a rushing upside that his floor is so high. And then it looks like they're committing to being able to pass better. They've got him some new weapons. So I think he's going to have a big year, and I think he's, 24 now? I should find that easy here. Yeah, 24. Going to be turning 25 this year. So I think he gets some more big years of his rushing, and if he gets any better at passing, he's going to solidify himself as that number 2 or 3 quarterback.
I like Lamar Jackson. Not a lot of room to go up, but I think to your point, Trevin, he's got probably several good years left with that rushing floor and potentially passing upside as they continue to add receiving options in this offense, most notably Rashad Bateman this year.
Yep, he was number quarterback 2 over the final 5 weeks this season. And so if you would have asked before in last year, it'd be impossible to get him. So now I think is your chance you can get him, and I think he's going to raise his play again.
I agree with you, Trevor. I do agree. It's right now would be the time to buy him. Last year he was getting drafted up there with Mahomes as the top quarterback getting taken, but I think right now where he's getting drafted, it's a pretty good deal with you getting him. I'm not a big fan of Lamar Jackson, but we're talking fantasy here, and he's one of the better running quarterbacks I've ever seen. And I mean, he's going to get you a lot of fantasy points that way, and they're helping out his wide receiving corps, and he still has Mark Andrews to get a lot of receiving touchdowns. So I like the pick. Good call.
I think I've heard you both do it, but maybe I'm wrong. Brent, you called it the wide receiver corpse. I think it's actually core, kind of like the Marine Corps. Not a huge deal, but I always think of like a dead body when you say corpse. It just makes me laugh. Fun fact for the day. But yeah, I like that Lamar pick, Trevin. Dynasty buy, I went with T. Higgins, which, Brent, I think you're going to like that one as our number one Bengals fan on this podcast. T. Higgins is currently going as wide receiver 24 in DLF ADP, just behind Cortland Sutton, just ahead of Deontay Johnson. He appeared in 14 full games as a rookie, and the results were impressive. He played 81% of the snaps, handled 21% target share those weeks. Only 20 wide receivers had more fantasy points during that span, despite Joe Burrow missing half the season. His best weekly finish was 9th in Week 10, but of his 7 top 30 fantasy weeks, 5 came in the final 7 games, with full games with Joe Burrow. So they started to develop a rapport, and I think that's hopefully going to carry over to this season if Burrow can get all the way back healthy. This offense throws the ball a lot, number 11 in pass plays per game last season, despite missing Burrow for most of the year. So I think with him being back, there's going to be plenty of volume to support both Higgins and Chase. And Tyler Boyd, I think, is not a huge threat to T. Higgins getting volume in my eyes. I think Boyd slides in there is probably the number 3 option pretty clearly once Chase starts to emerge this season. So I am buying T. Higgins at cost, and I think he has wide receiver 1 upside going forward.
I obviously like the pick. I thought about picking T. Higgins too. The only thing that held me back was I just think Chase and Boyd will take a little bit from him. And I do agree with you. He definitely has a chance to be wide receiver 1 in fantasy. And I do think he is a wide receiver 1 for the Bengals. So I really like the pick.
That's what I like to hear, Brent.
I'm a little iffy on it. I'm worried about the offense this year, and just I don't know where he slots in after that with Chase coming there. So I don't know. I'm not as high on Higgins as you are. I actually think Boyd's going to do all right. He's going to be that underneath the slot guy, especially with goodness gracious, the quarterback. I can't even think of the quarterback's name. I'm losing my mind. Burrow's injury. I don't know if he's going to be targeting a lot of deep balls downfield, especially what we've seen out of camp so far. So I'm a little more iffy on Boyd than you are, or Higgins than you are.
Yeah, I think the situation is, like I mentioned, the volume, and then just having Chase doesn't necessarily take away from him, in my opinion, just because I think that gives defenses, another receiver that they have to worry about covering. So, yeah, I'm optimistic, but I understand there's some potential unknowns there, I guess, with the additional Chase and with Burrow's injury. Trevin, do you want to start us off with your dynasty sell?
My dynasty sell is Juju Smith-Schuster. His price isn't too high right now. He finished last year pretty good, but I think now is when you can get the best price you can get if you're selling him, because he was a free agent and didn't seem like he had a lot of teams calling. Went back to the Steelers on a 1-year deal. So they didn't pay him very much either, so I don't think they're very committed to him. And he comes back to where he might be the 3rd receiver there. And now that they have Harris and also Freiermuth, who I don't expect to be lighting the world on fire his first year, but he's going to be another guy taking away targets from him. So I just think he might be falling down the pecking order, and now might be the best time you can sell him, get some value back.
Another good pick. Nice job. I have him for a little bit later on, but you took all my points. So good job. I like it.
Thanks, Brent.
I'm not as big of a fan of this one. I think Juju has a role in this offense as the slot guy, and I think Ben's limitations play pretty closely into that with him and Deontay soaking up a lot of the short targets, and then Chase Claypool is probably going to be the one to suffer as the downfield guy. You mentioned the new tight end, Pat Freiermuth. I think he's probably not going to see a lot of playing time this year behind Eric Ebron, and Eric Ebron doesn't really scare me. He was there last year, and Juju still did fine. So, I think Juju's there for one more year to try to have a big year and then go out and get a big free agent contract. And I think that he is probably preparing with that mindset, and they probably brought him back knowing that was his mindset and with some understanding that they would do what they could within the context of the offense to try to help him achieve that goal. So I think that Juju is pretty locked in as, a wide mid to upper tier wide receiver 2. And I think that he has upside for a lot more. He's still only 24. And I think there's a good chance that he goes somewhere next year and ends up in a pretty good situation. So I like Juju. I think that I wouldn't be counting on him as more than a wide receiver 2 going forward, but the guy who's been one of the best receivers in fantasy for the one season opposite Antonio Brown and a consistent performer even without Antonio Brown there is still only 24 is probably not somebody I'm looking to sell right away in Dynasty.
I wish I had him so I could sell him to your ass.
Me too. Sounds like you'd sell him pretty cheap. What would you sell him for, Trevor?
I'd be happy getting the future second.
Whoa.
That is cheap.
That is really cheap.
I don't think you can get a first from him, and I don't think his value is going to be higher next year. So I'd be happy getting that.
There's a lot of space between a first and a second, though. And I think you could probably get first. I don't know, he was number 24 in fantasy points per game last season.
Sure, but I think it's a pretty big call where the team he's at, the team that sees him every day and drafted him, wasn't super committed to bringing him back. That tells me a lot. He didn't get big offers anywhere else, so they said, "Okay, we'll have you for another year." Then on the cheap, they weren't. They didn't say we need to lock this guy up forever, and they're the ones that know his value best.
Yeah,
and I think Claypool is going to have a decent role on this team too. I don't know. I don't know. I think. I'll just say it. He's my redraft fade, and the reason why I had him a redraft fade instead of a dynasty sell is because what Levi said. What's going to happen next year? What if because I know the Chiefs wanted him this year. What if he goes to the Chiefs next year and then he'll be possibly a wide receiver 1? So I don't know. But for this year, with the question marks with Big Ben and all the other guys, Deontay Johnson, he's going to get the receptions. Chase Claypool, I think he's going to have a bigger role in that offense. And yeah, Juju is still going to be there, but I just think he's the third guy now in that offense.
I got some thoughts on that since we're talking about Claypool. He's my dynasty sell, so I think you're selling the wrong guy here, Trevin and Brent. Wow. And here's my case for selling Claypool. He's currently going as wide receiver 20 in DLF startup ADP, just behind Brandon Ayuk and just ahead of Mike Evans. He's second-round pick last year, had his ups and downs, showed a ceiling, 7 catches, 110 yards, 3 touchdowns on 10 targets in week 5. That was 42.6 points, had everybody going crazy about him. That performance alone was 22% of his total points on the year. So pretty huge impact from that 1 week. He went on to finish 8th among wide receivers with 9 touchdowns and 25th at the position in fantasy points. But here's the rub. I don't think he can repeat those numbers, and here's why. He finished with 13 red zone targets, which was number 24 among receivers, but finished 8th among receivers with those 9 touchdowns. So even with limited opportunity, he still was able to get a lot more touchdowns, and I would expect some regression there. He also had 2 rushing touchdowns. It's hard to see that recurring, and that contributed to a strong finish as well. The Steelers were number 2 in pass plays per game last season at almost 42 attempts per game. This is a team that took Najee Harris in the first round, got rid of James Conner this offseason. They want to run the ball more and rely on their defense, and they just couldn't do it at all last season. And I think that's a point of emphasis this season. So I would expect pass volume to be down pretty significantly this year. This is also a team, like we kind of alluded to already, that has 39-year-old Ben Roethlisberger at quarterback. Roethlisberger's arm is basically a noodle at this point. Last year, he averaged just over 7 air yards per attempt, which was number 28 among quarterbacks. So he's not throwing the ball downfield hardly at all. And meanwhile, Claypool is a downfield receiver. His average target distance was 13.3 yards last season. So I think the skill sets and usage of Deontay Johnson and Juju Smith-Schuster better align with Ben's limitations at this point than Claypool's. So if you have a team that's almost guaranteed to pass less, a receiver whose skill set doesn't align well with his quarterback, and who has 2 other options that are better fits for his quarterback, he's going to have to be incredibly efficient to maintain his value. And Claypool is not that efficient. He finished number 82 among receivers in true catch rate, which takes your total receptions as a percentage of your catchable targets. He finished number 33 among receivers in yards per reception. So it's possible that he improves his efficiency or gets more volume than I expect, but I think it's very likely that he loses value this season. And then you're heading into next offseason where Ben Roethlisberger is likely gone, and you're looking at a new quarterback, whether it's Dwayne Haskins, Mason Rudolph, or someone else. I think that's a risky proposition.
You have some good points. I just don't think I would sell Claypool right now. He's shown flashes that he could be pretty good, and that was his rookie year. And I mean, maybe those 2 rushing touchdowns, I mean, that likely won't happen again next year, you said. Maybe it does, and maybe they try to do it more since it was successful last year. If something works, I mean, why stop doing it? So,
because I have Najee now, Brent.
Is he going to be good? I don't know. And honestly, I tried to stay away from any Pittsburgh Steelers guys, even though I picked Juju for this, because they're a big question mark with Ben. If Ben is healthy and he's better than he was last year, he can make all 3 of those wide receivers fantasy relevant. If he is what I expect he's probably going to do, is probably get hurt and probably only play half the season. Then we have Dwayne Haskins out there, and only one of those guys will really be fantasy relevant. So it was tough. It was tough to pick any Steelers, but I picked Juju because I don't think he's going to have that great of a year. And he had 97 catches last year. It's quite a bit, but he only had 831 yards. So his yards per catch isn't that great.
Because Ben can't throw the ball down the field. Which is why Claypool's gonna suck, man. Brent.
No, that's not what I'm thinking at all. It's just I don't know. We will see. We'll see if Ben's great this year, then all 3 of those guys will be pretty good. And if Ben's not, I think it'll just be Deontay Johnson getting a lot of catches.
Trevin, any thoughts on Claypool or anything
Nope,
else?
I said what I had about Juju. I think we're just arguing about which guy we should be selling right now, and I think it's Juju.
Yeah.
I think it's Chase. So our points are pretty similar.
Sounds like none of us are buying the Steelers offense at this point.
Yeah.
It's just it'll be such a mystery after this year. They're going to have to change their whole offense after Ben's gone. Maybe he sticks around another year. That'd be funny.
If it's up to him, he will, I'm sure. Yeah. Brent, who's your sell?
My sell is Hollywood Brown. I had him as a fade last year, so I'm still thinking the same thoughts on him. They brought in Sammy Watkins, brought in Rashad Bateman on a team that doesn't really like to pass the ball. And when they will be passing, they'll be looking to Mark Andrews. And he's already having hamstring issues this training camp. And for a speed guy like that, that's never good at all. He was just mediocre last year, and I just don't think he'll have the production. I don't think he'll even have the production that he had this past year. So I'm definitely selling Marquise Brown.
Trevin, you too?
That seems a little low to be selling on what's he going at for his ADP right now.
He is currently going as wide receiver 49. So between this and Donovan Peoples-Jones, Brent's really peddling in the bargain bin.
Yeah, I agree. I'd sell him, but I just don't think you can get a whole lot for him right now.
Yeah. At cost, I think he's worth a flyer, but I'm not counting on him for anything. So, Brent, if you want to sell him, I wouldn't blame you, but I don't know. You're just getting another flyer probably for him.
The only reason I might hang on to him at this point is his value so low that maybe having somebody else come in as that one receiver, maybe he works better as being a two receiver, and that's kind of what he needs to be a better pro.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before. The Ravens have expressed a desire to pass more this season, and based on what we know about last year, where they were, I think, last in the league in pass attempts, they can't pass any less. So any increase in volume, certainly, I would think would potentially help Marquise Brown's value, but we'll see.
They lost their offensive. What was that guy that went to the Texans? The new head coach, wasn't he the
passing game coordinator?
Passing game coordinator for the Ravens. Yeah.
Yeah.
What a mess down there in Houston.
Yeah, not great. I'll go first with my Dynasty stash, sticking with the Ravens, actually. My stash is, Brent, a name I think you're familiar with, and we've talked about before, Josh Oliver. Josh Oliver was originally selected by the Jacksonville Jaguars at the beginning of the third round in 2019. Injuries have kept him from making an impact so far in his career. In 2 years, he's had 6 targets, which he turned into 3 catches for 15 yards in 4 games. So not a great first 2 years, but he missed 6 games with a hamstring strain in 2019, 6 games with back fractures in 2019, and the whole season last year with a foot fracture. Mark Andrews is an unrestricted free agent after the season, and we all know how the Ravens love their tight ends. They were working 3 into the game at times when they had Andrews, Boyle, and Hurst. Oliver could be that third one this year who starts mixing in and has some potential for more down the road. I would imagine they'd probably bring back Andrews, but if they chose not to, if they liked what they saw out of Oliver, he could be in line for a bigger opportunity as the primary receiving tight end in this offense. And one other thing that just a note on Oliver, his best comparable on Player Profiler is Hayden Hurst, which kind of made me laugh given how he's with the Ravens. He's now with the Ravens, who traded Hurst to the Falcons before last season. So that's what I got on Josh Oliver. I think he's worth a shot in the end of your bench, or you're going into the camp here.
Love the pick, Levi. Love the pick. I thought about having him as my stash, but I figured that you would, so I got a different stash. So I mean, there's a reason why they traded for him. I mean, it's not very often a team will trade for like an unknown tight end like that, and they must really like him. So that's good call.
Thanks, Brent.
Yeah, that's not a bad pick there. He might open up a position for him. I didn't realize he's 69th overall just in 2019. Got drafted 69th overall. So
yeah. And he came out of San Jose State, so pretty good draft capital for a small school tight end.
Yep, not a bad stash.
Brent, who you got?
My stash is David Njoku, Cleveland Browns, third string tight end. Basically looking at him as a possible trade target to another team. I mean, a team like the Buffalo Bills, they need a tight end, and I don't think that deal with Ertz is going to work out, or maybe nobody wants Ertz. I think Njoku is the next guy that you'd go after, and if he goes to a team like the Bills, Josh Allen can definitely use him and make him pretty fantasy relevant. Fantasy stats, they weren't the greatest the last 2 years, but I just don't want to give up on him just yet. I just think he's worth a stash and hope that he gets traded. If he doesn't the first couple weeks, go ahead and drop him and see what happens. But I just think with him for the Browns is not fantasy. He's not worth a roster spot. But I think there's a good chance he could finally get traded. He's been asking for it for over a year now. So if they do actually do it, he could become a pretty good fantasy tight end, I think, for a team.
It's you and me are just all about the third string tight ends tonight. Yeah, David Njoku is another one of those cautionary tales. Trevin, a first-round tight end, ultra-athletic, coming out of Miami. Never quite hit in the NFL so far, so
had a similar college career than Pitts. I got you.
Similar athlete, best comparable to Travis Kelce on Player Profiler. 698 yards receiving this last year in college. Doesn't give you any, make you question anything,
No,
huh?
that's Pitt's average like 90 yards a game. It's not even comparable to what they did in the last year of their college.
Any thoughts on Njoku?
I don't know. How many tight ends would you have to have on your bench just to be taking a flyer on Njoku? I just don't know if he's worth rostering.
It'd have to be a pretty big roster, but I don't know.
He's going into his fifth year now. He's definitely a stash, but just don't know if I'd even have him on a roster taking up a spot. You'd probably have to have 4 or 5 tight ends on your roster just to keep Njoku around. But he could get traded and get in a better situation. That's my only thoughts on him.
Yeah.
Trevin, who's your stash?
So we talked about him already, but I've got Donovan Peoples-Jones sticking with the Browns here. I kind of said all my thoughts with Brent. I think he came in with great measurements, and if the receivers are gone next year, he could be looking at being a starting receiver next year, and he's a good athlete.
Good call.
Right. Well, yeah, that's where you should have had Peoples-Jones, Brent.
You got to buy him though. He's on dynasty teams.
Trevin, who's your redraft sleeper?
This one, I don't know. I'm gonna have to kind of talk myself into this one still. My redraft sleeper is Baker Mayfield. He's got better stats. Every year he's looked like a better quarterback. Last year with Landry and OBJ both got hurt. If they're both back, I know they're not going to be in their primes anymore, but if they're just solid receivers again, he's got that going for him. If they do open up the passing game a little bit more, he did finish between week 11 to week 16 last year. He was quarterback 9. The problem is the passing volume, but in those weeks he did have games of 33 pass attempts, 47, 32, 53, and 27 in week 17. So they've opened it up sometimes. He's put up some big fantasy weeks when they do that. So it's kind of just hoping they throw it a little more. But like I said, I gotta kind of talk myself into that too. His ADP right now on ESPN is the 15th quarterback. I'd be pretty comfortable taking him up to that 11-12 range. And if I'm going not high in a quarterback, I'd be okay with him being my QB1 if I go other positions first on a redraft.
Well, you didn't talk me into it. I don't like it that much now. They got to run the hell out of the ball this year if they want to win games, and I think that's what they're going to do.
That's all you got, Brent? I mean, I'm expecting a little more fire out of our resident Baker hater.
Hey, I like Baker Mayfield. It's just, for fantasy, I don't like him that much. So I hope he does well. I like the Browns.
Yeah, I don't know. It's okay. Like I could see it. I know weather was also a factor last year in some of those games where he performed.
Yeah, they had that first half of the schedule or whatever. They had that 80-mile-an-hour winds and snow and rain different weeks.
Yeah. But kind of like Brent said, I think that the team is built to run the ball, and that's going to be his limiting factor in fantasy and probably why he'll have a hard time getting to that quarterback one finish. They were number 29 in pass plays per game last season, even with those high volume weeks that you mentioned, Trevin. And I think that they have a really good team, and I expect them to be ahead a lot, which really, it's pretty easy to just hand the ball off to Nick Chubb and watch him smash people's faces in. And congratulations to Nick Chubb on his extension. And then, of course, they have Kareem Hunt to mix in there as well. So it's a team that's built to run the ball. And if they get ahead, which I actually expect them to do quite a bit this year, I think they're going to be pretty good. I just think that kind of caps Baker's upside. And he can run the ball, but it's not a huge part of his game. Last year, Trevin, what did he finish with for rushing yards? Looks like 54 attempts for 165 yards. So he chips in a little bit there, but it's not a huge difference maker. So I think it's just when you're looking at paths for him to finish as a quarterback one, there's a pretty narrow path that for him to get there, and that's probably why I don't hate it. I don't love it either.
All right.
All right, Brent, who you got?
My redraft sleeper, another bargain bin, guys. So
Jesus, Brent, come on.
But he's a sleeper. So give me a break now, and definitely draftable, especially if you're.
Oh, good.
Would you have to specify that it's draftable? We know something good's coming.
Anyways, my sleeper is Samaje Perine, Cincinnati Bengals running back. Just signed a 2-year contract for $3.3 million. He signed that contract back in March while Giovanni Bernard was still on the team, and then like a month later, Giovanni requested that trade, and they got rid of him. But it's obviously the Bengals they like him quite a bit for them to sign a running back like that. I think he was 25 years old when I checked. I didn't write it down, but the advanced stats and metrics, they love him. PFF had him like the highest. I don't look into that stuff too much. Levi probably knows all this stuff, but PFF had him the highest rated Cincinnati Bengal on offense, highest scoring offensive player. He was a great running back in college. 1,700 yards, 21 touchdowns, and 6.5 yards per game. And then some guy named Joe Mixon came in and kind of took his role and kind of diminished his role a little bit, which is crazy because that's who he's backing up right now. I do think he's the clear handcuff to Mixon. I do think he should definitely be drafted if you happen to draft Joe Mixon. And I mean, if you're sitting there at like 17th, 18th round and you see him still on the board, grab him, because maybe eventually down the road, the Joe Mixon owner, after Joe Mixon goes down, will give you a pretty good deal for him. And either way, I do think if he does happen to get his shot, I think he can be a pretty good running back in this offense. So I like him for a sleeper.
Brent, what would you say to people who would argue that he had his shot last year and he really didn't do that much with it?
What would I say?
Yeah.
Maybe fantasy wise, he probably didn't get the points that you guys were expecting out of him, but I mean, Giovanni Bernard was there, so he kind of shared that role. So I don't know if he fully got the chance last year with Gio there.
Yeah. I mean, Mixon only played 6 games last season, and there were 3 games where Perine got double-digit carries, and he had 95 yards on 13 carries against the Texans, but then his other 2, he both had 10 carries for 32 yards each against the Titans and Dallas. So, I mean, even with Mixon out, it's not like he was this huge fantasy factor. And then you mentioned Bernard being there and Bernard now being gone, but they also did bring in Chris Evans, 6th-round pick, so it's not great draft capital, but Samaje Perine was a 4th-round pick, so it's not like he had a ton of draft capital either, and he's also going into his 5th year in the league. So I don't know whether he's the true handcuff. You seem to be pretty confident that he is. It wouldn't surprise me if Chris Evans ended up being number 2 on that depth chart and Perine was 3rd. But at any rate, I think probably if Mixon goes down a lot like last season, you probably don't want to have to start either of those guys.
I mean, you might. I mean, it's a decent offense, and I mean that 95-yard game that he had, probably better than almost all of Mixon's games last year, aside from a few. But I mean, yeah, the 10 carries for 35 yards, not great against the Titans and the Cowboys, but I mean, obviously the Bengals see something. They wanted him back, and they got him. And they even got rid of Giovanni Bernard, trusting Perine. And, yeah, Chris Evans, I think if anything, at his ceiling would be maybe like the receiving back out of this on this team, but I don't think Chris Evans can handle a full load.
Trevor, any thoughts on Samaje Perine?
I hate it, Brent. I don't know what we're doing here. His draft ADP on ESPN. I had to go to page 6 of the running backs to find it. He's running back 257 on
running back 257.
Running back 257.
Yikes!
There's no reason to roster Perine. He had his chance last year. They brought him back because he's so cheap. But he's just don't draft Perine.
It'll be fun talking about Perine in week 5 after his 100-yard performance after Mixon's out for the year. But all right.
Do you want to know the only good thing about Perine? Melvin Gordon set the single-game rushing record against Nebraska in 2014 with 408 yards. A game I was at in Wisconsin only took him 25 attempts, broke the NCAA record. So that sucked. But it was only 1 week later that Perine broke it against Kansas, so that record didn't stand very long against Nebraska, and that 427 yards against Kansas.
And still got drafted in the 4th round.
Which is way more yards than I expect him to get on this full season.
That might be more yards than he's had in any season in his pro career. Nope, he had 600 his rookie year. But that 400 yards is more than he's had the other 4 seasons combined. He's had 349 the last 4 years, Brent.
I will say he's always getting drafted in the best balls that I'm doing. I think that's 20 rounds. So he's always getting drafted in the 18th or around there. So
yeah,
he's getting drafted.
Right. Well, Brett, you're going to love my sleeper, which is Joe Mixon. So Joe Mixon's currently going 22nd overall as running back 13 in ESPN ADP. Like Perine, he's going into his 5th NFL season after an injury-plagued 2020 campaign in which he was limited to 6 games. But in those 6 games, he was super busy. He had 81% of Cincinnati's carries, 12% of their targets, and sat 10th among running backs in fantasy points per game. For perspective, he handled about 75% of the carries and 8% of the targets in 16 games while he finished as running back 13 in 2009. So he was getting even more work last year, even with Brent's favorite, Giovanni Bernard, still there at that point. He's still only 24 years old. He's now delivered solid running back 2 numbers in 3 consecutive seasons on a per-game basis. He's an early down feature back with a rising target share, especially with Giovanni Bernard gone now, and a healthy or semi-healthy at least to start the year, Joe Burrow under center. I think his outlook is on the upswing. I think he's a good running back 2 target with running back 1 upside. So I like Mixon to outperform his ADP if he can stay healthy, which, as you alluded to, Brent, has been a challenge for him in his career. Part of me, you know what I really think? I think that
he was injured. Fake?
I really think he was injured last year, and then it was so weird. I don't know if you guys remember this, but they kept being like, we'll see this week, and then this week he's not playing. And it was just like a week-to-week basis for like the last 5-6 weeks of the season. So he had a mid-foot sprain in week 6, and he missed the last 10 games of the season. I think at some point they just got to like, Joe Burrow's hurt, the team's terrible. Why would we bring back Joe Mixon to try to help us win games when we're better off just waiting until we're not doing anything this year anyway? We're better off just waiting until next year and having them both back at full strength than risking him getting hurt again. That's my theory, but what do you guys think about Mixon? I know, Brent, I think I know your thoughts.
I don't know. I've had enough of Mixon. I mean, I've liked him over the years, but I'm done. I'm done with him in fantasy. So I hope he has a good year, but I'm definitely not drafting him in anywhere. Trevin?
Yeah. I'll just get right into my redraft fade. My redraft fade is all the Bengals skill players. I really don't like how they're doing this year. I think they have probably bright futures after this year, but that line, it looks like it's going to be terrible. These reports of Burrow isn't quite right coming back. Even with Burrow last year, the first 10 weeks, they averaged 21 points a game, which is 25th in the league for a full season. So I don't think Burrow's not going to be right away. That's a terrible line. I just think all their skill players are going to suffer this year. With the price of Mixon's probably top 20 for ADP. Higgins and Chase are both top 30-ish receivers, and even Boyd where he's at. I'm just not going to take any of them at their current prices for this coming year for the Bengals. Not dynasty. I like all their futures, but this season I think they're all getting kind of inflated, and I'm looking to buy them next year when that post-hype bounce that usually happens.
Yeah, to your point, Trevin, I don't know if you saw this. There was obviously some reports going around about Burrow not looking comfortable in camp, and there's a reporter from Cincinnati, their local sports reporter named Jeremy Roush on Twitter, who had a quote from Tyler Boyd today on Joe Burrow's progress, and Tyler Boyd, one of Joe Burrow's receivers, said, quote, "I think he's a little iffy on his knee, but it's hard to tell. I think he's ready to go, but he doesn't want to do too much." And that reporter thought that pretty perfectly described what Burrow looks like right now. So that doesn't sound great. Obviously, they have over a month still until the season starts. So there is time for Burrow to potentially get back to being comfortable in the pocket. But they didn't take Penei Sewell in the draft like they could have. They took Jamar Chase, and this offensive line has had its struggles. So that
and this is practice where
help.
They're not even rushing the passer, and it didn't. From the reports, was he's not comfortable. Now I'm sure that won't be what it has. He's got a month to prepare, but it still scares me getting into that full game action. If he's not right for the first 8 weeks to get comfortable because that ACL happened in week 11-ish last year, then I just don't like taking these players and not thinking they're at full strength for the first 8 weeks of the season.
Yeah, Brett.
Agree.
Do you care to elaborate on that, Brett?
Well, I don't know. I'm not. I mean, you guys make some good points, especially about Burrow. That does bother me a little bit. I'd like to see him overcome that, and maybe he started too early. Maybe he needed to take a couple weeks off in training camp just to kind of work by himself. And I don't know. It's just and I'll be honest, that was part of the reason why I didn't pick T. Higgins for the dynasty buy too. So, I mean, it does bother me a little bit.
Yeah. Trevin, did you want to give your redraft sleeper or use?
Oh, I did. It was Baker Mayfield.
Oh, that's right. So we all got our sleepers in. You gave your fade.
Yep.
I'll go next with my redraft fade. Mine is Odell Beckham. So Beckham is currently going 65th overall as wide receiver 26th, so a 6th-round pick. Beckham is coming back for his 3rd season with the Browns. He was pretty underwhelming in 2019. Did hit 1,000 yards, but 74 catches, barely over 1,000 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He had 1 top 10 fantasy week that season. He was injury-plagued in 2020, had 23 catches for 319 yards and 3 touchdowns, 1 finish better than 19th in his 6 games. So durability is a concern. He's averaging less than 10 games played over the last 4 seasons. So it's not just a 2020 thing. It's been going on for a while with Beckham. He's turning 29 this year. I think his target ceiling, like we talked about a little bit with Baker Mayfield, is capped, just given Cleveland's run-first offense. And he's going ahead of some other players that I like. The aforementioned T. Higgins, Cortland Sutton, and Jerry Jeudy. I think I'd probably take a shot on any of those guys over him. So I don't know, guys. I think the injuries are taking a toll, and he's kind of getting to the end of his career. And I just, with that Cleveland offense, looking at running the ball so much, I just don't see a lot of upside here to take him where he's going right now.
Yeah, it's not a bad pick. I hope he can return to his old form, but yeah, durability is definitely a concern. That Cowboys game last year was pretty awesome, though. That was like the old Odell. That was fun to watch. I thought he was back for good after that, and then he had that injury, and I don't know. I just hope he can get back to that form, because I do think he could help this offense, and I do think he would help Baker Mayfield quite a bit. And I think it's kind of crazy that people want to blame Odell for like once he left, that team played better. I definitely don't agree with that. They can definitely use Odell, and he'd help them out quite a bit. So, but like I said, durability, you got to be playing in order to make fantasy points, and he hasn't been the last 4 years. So it's not a bad pick.
Yeah, like you If he's healthy, I do like what he's going to probably do. It's just with his name, I think, is why he's getting drafted in that range. So I agree with you that he would be a fade at where he's at. But just looking at where he did that first year in Cleveland, where he did decent, had 1,000 yards, 4 touchdowns, which I think we can agree is probably close to his ceiling, just not even talking about his age or anything, just how the volume of Cleveland passing. And that would put him right at 30th last year for points in a full year for receivers. So I do think he's drafted a little high on ADP, being in that 25, 26 spot. But if he's healthy, I think he's pretty comfortable being the 30th, 31st. You just have to know that. I think that's what you kind of have to expect as his ceiling.
Yeah, and I think he only had 4 touchdowns that year, so if he had like 8, he may be, kind of a lower end wide receiver 2, maybe the 20 to 25 range, which if that's the problem though, like to your point, Trevin, he's getting drafted as wide receiver 26, and I think that's about his ceiling with a much lower floor, so that's why I'm lower on him.
Yep, I agree. And it's just his game was never, even when he was so good, it was never built on speed, which gives me a little bit of faith that he's just such a good route runner and knowing to get leverage against his opponents. And so I do think he can get back to being that wide receiver 1, but I don't see it happening with this Browns offense. And by the time he goes somewhere else, he's going to be 30, 31 years old.
I kind of disagree with that. Wide receiver 26 is a ceiling. If he plays all 17 games this year, I think wide receiver 1 will be his ceiling. It's just that it might be pretty unlikely that he'll be able to play it. I mean, it's been 4 years now, so I mean, just keep on seeing the same thing. So I mean, obviously his floor is awful. I mean, just not playing at all. So I don't have Odell Beckham very much on my best balls. So, but I'd love to see, I mean, I love watching him play, but if he does happen to play, his ceiling is very high in my eyes.
Yeah. I just think it's the volume of their passing there, Brent, with the Browns. Or what'd you say, Levi? They're 29th last year on passing attempts. That first year with the Browns, he had 133 targets, 74 receptions, just over 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns. Like Levi said, you can get that touchdown up a little bit, but it's just harder to get to that 100 receptions with a team that doesn't pass it very much.
And Brent, were you saying wide receiver 1 overall or just a wide receiver 1?
I mean, probably a wide receiver 1, top 12. But I mean, you guys do yourself a favor, go watch that Cowboys game from last year. That's a fun game to watch.
Yeah, I looked up that game after you said that. He had 5 catches for 81 yards and 2 touchdowns.
Check his rush. He had a rushing touchdown too, I think.
That's right. Yeah, he had that 50-yard rush, I think.
Yeah, 2 carries for 73 yards and a touchdown. So,
and that was to win the game too.
Yep.
Yeah. So 150 total yards and 3 touchdowns. It's a pretty solid game, but I just don't know. That's a lot to count on a weekly basis from him at this point.
Yeah.
Man, he came in so hot. That first year, 1,300 yards, 109 yards receiving a game. Then second year, 97. Third year, 85. He was averaging 95 yards receiving a game his first 3 years in the league.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right, Brent, who you fading?
My fade was Juju. We talked about him.
All right.
Attaboy.
I think we've given the Steelers wide receiver core plenty of attention tonight. All right, so let's go on to our question of the week. Brent, you had a really good question this week. Why don't you throw it out for us?
Yeah, I saw this on Twitter a couple weeks ago. There was a dynasty owner who offered, I can't remember what the offer exactly was, but let's just say it was Nick Chubb for Cam Akers. And shortly after, maybe a couple hours after the news broke that Cam Akers was going to be out for the year, the person who was getting offered Nick Chubb jumped on the trade and accepted it. Is there a deadline to cancel these types of trades? Because obviously that person didn't get online on time to revoke the trade. So I think that the plan was, I think what actually happened for that was there was a big discussion. There was polls taken throughout the league, and I think they just canceled the trade completely, and the other person was so mad that he actually left the league. So
Good riddance.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is there a deadline? I mean, what if you wait 2 days and the Cam Akers trade is still out there? What do you do? Is there a certain time that you guys can think of? Go ahead, Levi.
Here's what it comes down to me, and I'll quote our friend of the show here, Duchesne, who has in his bylaws for one of his leagues, don't be a douchebag. And if you accept that trade, like morally, it's just, you know that they offered that in good faith before the injury happened, and you're accepting it in bad faith afterwards. You are being a douchebag. That trade, I am never, ever, ever, hardly, almost never, except in situations like these or clear like collusion or something like that, in favor of vetoing or reversing trades. But in this case, I think that reversing it was the right thing to do. This guy knew that wasn't, the offer wasn't what he was getting after this injury happened. It was someone who was trying to have good faith negotiations, and he did this just to try to screw somebody over, and he deserved to have it reversed. And I'm glad he left the league. Nobody wants to play fantasy football with somebody like that.
I agree. Trevin?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's pretty easy. I mean, that guy that accepted should have just went in there and rejected it. Obviously wasn't getting hurt Cam Akers. The guy wasn't wanting to hurt Cam Akers, so that obviously wasn't what the trade was for.
Yeah.
What do you
think? But you guys have. Go ahead, Brent. No, you go.
What do you think about the people who look at trades and just let them sit until they expire? Does that bother you at all?
I hate that. I think you should always respond, even if it's a bad trade. Just reject it and don't say anything or whatever. But to me, part of being in a fantasy league is being active enough to at least respond when somebody sends you a trade offer.
I agree. What I would do in that situation with the Akers one, I'd probably try to contact the owner, like, you still want to trade Nick Chubb for Akers? And if he says yes, I mean, go for it. But obviously he probably won't. But I'd at least check with him first.
Yeah, that's the decent thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
How about
people who leave offers out there?
I definitely don't just want to leave them out there. You want to respond as quick as you can, or whatever, however long it takes you to respond. If it's a couple days, whatever. But here's a situation for you. So on this recent trade I did to get Darnold off my team, the guy I was trading for didn't want Russell Gage, so I knew a guy who did to get a third-round pick for him that I could use in this trade. So I got that third-round pick sitting in my queue, so I had that in my hand, but I didn't want to accept it yet until I knew that the Darnold trade would go through. So that was sitting in there for 3 or 4 days while I was negotiating the Darnold deal. Is that acceptable?
I think so.
I'd say so, yeah. That's fine.
I just told the first owner that I was still thinking about it. I didn't tell him I was using this other trade because I didn't want him jumping in on that or reversing this one. I needed that in my hand to know that this trade would go through.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I think that happens in the NFL. I think that's kind of what we saw with the Eagles this year, where they traded down, or the Dolphins, traded down and then back up right away within the matter of minutes, and that's kind of what you did with this trade. So I think that's fair game.
All right.
But yeah, good question, Brett. Don't be that guy. All right, beer check. I got Bud Light. Boring. I'll go 5-2. It's fine.
Yikes.
That's like an average beer, man.
Yikes.
I guess so. I'm drinking Thunderhead Brewing Prairie Peach. Getting on the
Nice.
peach train, so we'll give it a try.
Welcome aboard. It's good for backs.
I hope so. It's decent. 6-2.
So I've got my stepmom lives in Pennsylvania, so my dad went up there, drove up to be with her for about a week, and came back with the Yingling plug for me. I really like Yingling beer. You can only get it in the East Coast, so he brought a bunch of Yingling beers back to me. So first I drank a Yingling Black and Tan. That was really good. We'll do 8-7 on that one. The second one is just the regular Yingling Lager. Also really good. We'll say 9 on that one.
Dang. What's high? Brent, have you had Yingling?
No, I haven't. It's rated
I
pretty
don't
high.
think you're missing that much.
No, you don't like it? I really like it.
It's all right. I wouldn't go out of my way to get it like like that, though.
Drive 1,000 miles.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for being part of the Fantasy Players Club, everybody. We'll have a new episode for you next week that will live stream on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Until then, on behalf of Brent, the Bad Back Hikus, and Trevin, the Baby Maker Cremosta, this is Levi, the Heartbreak Kid Valentine, wishing you a great week.
See ya.
See ya.
All right. For the after show, I put on college football realignment on here. So we got some big news with Oklahoma and Texas going to the SEC. We have Clemson and Florida State reportedly reaching out to the SEC to express an interest in joining the conference. Where do you guys fall on all this, Trevin? I know, knowing you, I'm guessing you have some strong thoughts, so we'll throw it to you first.
It just sucks. Like, we all kind of can see where this is going in 5 to 10, 20 years. There's going to be one conference, and they're going to decide who the champion is. There's no reason for them. There's no incentive for them to involve everybody. If they can have their 20 teams, 25 teams or whatever and crown a champion, they don't want to share the profits with everybody else. So that's where this is all kind of headed. It sucks that there's no consideration for rivalries or regions or anything like that. It's just going to be as much money as they can make. And there's just going to be realignments till they get to that stage, I think. And just sucks. I really wish we saw it with the EPL this last year, where an idea was floated of creating a super league and all the fans stood up against it and said, this is bullshit. We're not going to go with this. And I wish there was a way for college football fans to do that and stand up to these realignments that are just profiting these schools. But it doesn't seem to be. Everybody seems to be just rather clamoring to get into this instead of standing up for themselves.
So you don't even think there will be two conferences, like the Big Ten and the SEC, with like 20, 25 teams each? You think it'll just be one eventually?
Yeah, I don't think there's any incentive to involve more people, keep all the profits to themselves.
Well, I mean, it's going to be hard for, I don't know. I guess we'll see. But I was thinking,
but if
like,
you get all the football,
the
but I think if you just get the 20, 25 biggest ones in one conference and they get all the TV contracts, why would they want to involve 20 more schools to split the profits?
I just think it's going to be hard to say you have an undisputed champion if you have teams like Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State.
Yeah, they'd be in it. This eventual super conference.
I don't know. I have a hard time seeing how it happens that way, just because you have all the schools that are already in the SEC, and that might be where you have the fans rise up. If you have like, I don't know, like you go back to
the problem is it just seems like every school's looking out for themselves, and that which they kind of have to do, but so they're going to say, okay, if you don't want to be in, then you can be on the outside. What do you want to do?
But I think what I think would preclude what you're talking about is, like, so far it's been kind of these teams where they haven't had the historic rivalries that go all the way back. Like Nebraska and Oklahoma were already split up. You have Oklahoma and Texas who are keeping that together. I think part of me wants to believe that, like, if you had the SEC and they were thinking about kicking out South Carolina and Arkansas and Missouri, probably wouldn't be in that top 20 to 25. Who else is Kentucky? Vanderbilt. Like some of these schools that the big SEC schools have played for 100 years every year, that maybe that would be the point where you'd have the fans say, why are we doing this just for a few more bucks? So, like, because like the Big 12 never really had that, just because it was, the Southwest Conference, the Big 8 kind of combined, and there wasn't, other than, Nebraska and Oklahoma had it for a while.
Sure, but they had Kansas and Missouri played however long together. Like that was like a bloody rivalry back to the early 1900s, and that got split up pretty easy. Those aren't national brands, but
and Texas and Texas A&M, same thing. But I think the thing with Kansas and Missouri is neither one of them is of football like major powerhouse. They're more fighting for survival. Like if Missouri wasn't in the SEC, they would be in, I think, a lot of trouble. And Kansas, they'd be in Kansas position like right now. So I don't know. That's what I just,
You've got more faith in it than I do.
I don't know. Yeah, or like the Big Ten. Like if you had, I don't know, like Michigan State. Like if we're just going to kick Michigan State out, I know their little brother and everything, but I think that would mean something to the people in the state of Michigan if they tried to go with just have Michigan join this top 20 group and say screw it, or like Purdue or Illinois, or I don't know. Maybe I'm
Yeah,
too
but which
optimistic.
one of these? That's where I think you might be. Like, would Michigan be, hey, you can join this super conference. We're going to have all the TV contracts. You're going to get this many millions of dollars. Or do you want to put your foot down here and we could just leave you out of this right now?
But
that's where I think every school is going to look out for themselves and say,
I
okay.
think the schools will. I just am hoping that the fans like of Michigan would say, we don't want to go join this stupid thing just for a few more bucks and not get a chance to make fun of Michigan State when we beat them again this year.
That's the thing I'm talking about, comparing it to the EPL with Super League, though, where we did see the fans come up, and then we just haven't seen that yet. And we've had so many realignments so far already that every fan is just, they've been upset, but they're more like, well, at least we're not stuck out on the in the breeze here. At least we're still with it.
Yeah. But I think the previous ones were like Nebraska was probably the biggest one of the previous round. And I probably sound like a Nebraska homer saying that, but like who else did you have? You had Colorado, Missouri, Texas A&M. Texas A&M, I guess you could argue, was maybe as big of a deal. But Brent, I don't know. What do you think about all this?
I don't like it. I'm with Trevin. I do think, yes, eventually down the road, 10 years from now, there might be like one, maybe two conferences, but I don't think it'll be 25 teams. I think it'll be 50, maybe 60 teams.
But why? Why would they do that?
I don't know.
There's not 60 teams that grow profit, so that's where I'm at. They are going to say
there's not 60 teams that get profit, that grow profit like that,
that drive TV markets, that actually are reasons for buying the conference package.
How many teams are in the Big Five or the Power Five?
That's where I just think there's 20 or so, 20 to 30 teams that pretty much drive the sport.
Brent, I think
why would we include the other teams when we could just have all the TV money ourselves?
Brent, I think what he's trying to say is, like, if you're looking at the pool that's already there and how much money gets distributed to each school, adding Texas and Oklahoma increases the amount that each school gets.
Yeah.
But if every school is getting an equal share and then you add someone like Texas Tech, that there's going to be a bigger pool of money, but on a per school basis, if everybody gets an even share, it's probably less.
Yeah.
Because they're contributing less money than they're taking in that scenario.
I don't know. I just think that would hurt their ratings some too, I think, too. I mean, yeah. They can make a lot of money right now, but if they switch to it's like a step below it's just like the NFL basically, but it's a step below, and we've seen stuff like that not succeed in TV ratings and stuff like that. So it might end up happening like that, but I hope it doesn't. I really do.
Here's my prediction. You ready for it?
Yeah.
It's going to be like two conferences, the Big Ten, the SEC, that actually matter, and they determine their own national champion every year. They have 20 to 25 teams, like you're talking about, Trevin. It's like the AFC and the NFC and the NFL. They each have set amount of teams, and then the champions of each of those play for the overall championship in the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
and
that's what I think too.
It's going to be the North versus the South, and they're going to call the championship the Civil War. Okay, that part might be a little too far, but I kind of believe all the rest that I said before that.
I don't know. I think that's just all about money, and they're going to look at, like we were talking about before, which teams are actually drawing from this pot that we're bringing in, and which teams are adding to the pot, and they're just going to try to get all the teams that are adding to it.
What I just don't understand is for like Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Nebraska, if they were to be invited to the SEC, I don't know how that would become that much more money than what they're already getting just based on the way it's currently structured. And then I question whether that would be the point where the fans would get up in arms and say, why are we going to the SEC for an extra $1 million or $2 million a year and playing all these schools that we don't care that much about when we could stay here, just make slightly less and play all the schools we've always played and not, have a lot more
That's
fun.
why I don't think it'll be the SEC. I think it'll be a new super conference. Because it'd be tough to kick schools out, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And where you're joining a different conference, you got Ohio State, Michigan, USC, Oregon, then the SEC schools, Nebraska, Florida, Alabama, Clemson, Florida State. And those are the schools that are joining this new super conference. Well, what's every TV market, every ESPN, Fox, they're going to say, do you want to bid on this super conference where every game will be televised? Or do you want to bid on these smaller conferences of SMU and Iowa State? Good luck. See how many ratings. See who's watching that game instead of one of the super conference games.
I just don't know what's like for the Super League. It was all the owners getting together.
Yeah,
and I think that's a lot harder to do at the college level, to have all of these presidents, chancellors, ADs get together and say, "Hey, let's have this super conference, and we'll all leave our current conferences." Mechanically, I just think that's harder.
That's just where I see it going, but I hope not.
I hope not, too.
The thing that is driving me crazy is like Kirk Herbstreit. Everybody was kind of throwing him on their shoulders and saying, look at this guy when he made that statement last week of, oh, I guess I was naive and didn't know this was all about money. Like, shut up, Kirk. You've been getting paid millions of dollars for however many years to cover the sport, and you were acting like you were naive to it. Like, shut up, Kirk.
Kirk can't think that.
Well, it's like you were profiting off that, and you're like, acting surprised that it's about money. Like,
it's always only about money.
Well, it shouldn't be Kirk with that message. Kirk's been profiting greatly off of it.
Yeah, but I think Kirk also does it because he loves college football, and that's kind of his point. Is like, yes, money is a big part of it for why he does it, I'm sure, but he also does it because he loves the sport and what's best for it. And maybe his hope was that colleges would have that same type of balance in their decision making, which clearly they do not. And maybe he was naive, but I don't think that Kirk's out of line in saying that, I guess is my point.
think he's out of line. I don't like a guy that's currently profiting off the system as it's set up, being like, oh, this is all about money. Like, yeah, Kirk, it's all about money. Check your bank account.
You can't balance both.
No, not when you're one of the highest paid people doing it.
I think you're being a little too hard on Kurt just because he makes a lot of money.
Yeah, I don't care if he makes a lot of money. It's just that he does it specifically covering the sport that he's like, why can't we all just do it for love? Okay, you do it for free then, Kirk, if you love it so much. I don't think
that's what he said.
Yeah, he's like, well, I guess I'm just naive. I didn't know people did this for money.
What was the actual quote? You're going to have to look that up. You're always so angry about college sports from the money. All right. Brent, you have any thoughts while Trevin looks that up?
No. I need to go walk around. I'm going to log off
right.
you guys. Guy.
All right. See ya. I think I would just say I agree with you both that it does suck, and I think that college football historically was a regional sport, and part of the thing that made people fall in love with it was the ability to talk trash to their neighbor at the tailgate for all of those rivalries where you're playing the school down the road or across the border or whatever. And it seems like we're losing that, and that's sad.
Yep. I agree with you. I think I've got it.
Because, I don't know, and we see it now more than ever, but for most of the schools out there on a given year, you're not expecting to win the national championship, and you're hoping to win your rivalry game and, go to a decent bowl and whatever. And that's enough for a lot of people to fill up dozens of stadiums across the country every Saturday for the last 50, 75, 100 years. So,
and to talk about it for years, like one big bowl win, that'll be something to talk about for years. Now it just, none of that really matters. It's win a national championship and how much money your conference can bring in from TV money.
Well,
So here's what
you're
I had
still
what
going to
Kirk
have
said.
all those schools who have no chance at winning it every year, and now it's just like, what do you have to look forward to if like those rivalries are going to be gone? Like Oklahoma may not play Oklahoma State every year, like Kansas and Missouri. To your point earlier, I mean, I don't know.
TCU and Texas.
Yeah, that old historic rivalry. What's the
So here's
quote?
what I just hate losing the tradition of the sport. I've always been, I guess, naive to it. I've tried to be the guy that's like, no, we're going to hold on to our traditions. People care about those traditions. They care about the rivalries. Clearly, the decision makers don't. And now we're in an arms race, and it's about the money.
That sounds like exactly what we all just agreed on here.
Yeah, but when he's profiting off of it already is my problem.
I think he's just
Like,
saying all the points we
sport so
said.
long has been about the money, except the athletes. Like for everybody else, it's been about the money since TV rights came in.
What was the part about the
including
money
Kirk.
and what he said?
I guess I've always been naive to it. I've always tried to be the guy that's like, no, we're going to hold on to our traditions. People care about those traditions. They care about the rivalries. Clearly, the decision makers don't, and we're now in an arms race, and it's about the money.
I don't have a problem
The whole
with that
thing's
quote
been
at
about.
all.
It's been about the money for the coaches. It's been about the money for the ADs. It's been about the money for all the TV providers for the last since TV rights were invented, except for athletes. The athletes are the only ones that haven't been about the money for 50 years.
I know this all just comes back to the athletes for you, but I think Kirk's just reiterating all the points we just discussed.
Yeah, but we
I
can
don't
say
know why
because
you
we're
have a
not getting
problem with
paid.
that.
We're not getting paid by it.
So nobody who makes money from college football could say that except for the players.
Yes. Nobody that makes money from it can complain about it being about the money, is my point.
It can't go too far for any of those people.
No.
I think that's counterproductive to the goal that we all would have of trying to keep it about what it's always been about as far as some of those traditions and the rivalries and things, when you're not allowing people who have a lot of influence in the sport to say those just because they make money from the sport.
Nope. We're just going to disagree on this one.
All right. On that note, have a great week, everybody.
See ya.